Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to a demo of WorkPlace OCR. During the session, I'm going to present a high-level overview of WorkPlace OCR, that is a licensed add-on for WorkPlace 2018 and higher. And then following, we'll do a quick Q&A session. And everyone see my WorkPlace screen? If somebody just wants to post in chat window that you can see it. See if somebody can post. I just want to make sure you can see my WorkPlace screen before I continue. Okay, thank you. First of all, I'm going to talk about some system settings and security that are applicable to the OCR functionality. So we're going to go into administration and system settings first. Then under accounts payable, this section here covers system settings for invoice capture. The first one is automatically submit PO invoices. So with invoice capture, you can either do a receipt match session with a PO invoice or create a check request with a non-PO invoice. So the first one would automatically submit PO invoices is once you do your OCR and it's learned the invoice, it can automatically submit that transaction for approval. And the next one, automatically submit non-PO invoices or check requests. Same thing, it can automatically submit it once the transaction, otherwise it'll be on the user's dashboard, or if we use the next section I'll talk about, it'll fall on the invoice capture user's dashboard. The third thing we need to look at is we have to have a default user for invoice capture. Now, with this user, you can have the invoice capture user, which falls into one bucket, and all your transactions can fall into that invoice capture user. Or you can uncheck this setting. It says make the default user for invoice capture user the owner of all invoices. So with this unchecked, the AP user that's submitting the OCR documents becomes the owner of that transaction. And the only difference to that is if a vendor emails invoices in, that I'll show you in a few minutes. And the type of transaction for PO invoices, it depends on whether you two-way match or three-way match, you would select receipt invoice or invoice. And I'm just going to duplicate my tab here. We're going to go administration and security. So for our invoice capture user, if you have this setting checked, the invoice capture user doesn't necessarily need to be a login to WorkPlace, but it has to be a user set up for login. So like if you're using Active Directory, you don't have to make this user an Active Directory user, because you're not going to be able to log, so you're not going to ever probably need to log into WorkPlace as this user. So it can just be a generic user. You know, they have to have requisition, check request, basic submit, security. And then on the UDFT, for this user, you can't set a full UDFT like you would a regular WorkPlace user. All you can do is set like the default GL account. You can always make that check request or like a name check request. You can set your payment terms. You can set default like user measure. I always set the user measure as each, so that way there's a user measure that falls on the transaction. But you can set defaults, but you can't set read-only. The read-only and hidden aren't even affected by invoice capture, but force required. If you set, say, 1099 box number force required on this user, and then the transaction falls to this user, the transaction will not be able to be submitted because it doesn't have that field inside our invoice capture module. And then for each user, and like I said, since this doesn't have to be like an Active Directory user, you would make each user that's processing transactions make them a transaction alternate for this user. So that way it falls on that dashboard and I can process those transactions. Under security, there's only two security settings. Invoice capture means that I can submit invoices to be OCR captured. Invoice capture cure means I can see the queue. So if you got a user that can only see the queue and process it, excuse me, then you would set them security. Generally, it's probably going to be the same. Both of these are going to be checked, but it depends on security of your environment. The one other thing with setup is there's a setup in the WorkPlace agent that I'm trying to get up here. On the WorkPlace agent, there's an invoice capture job. So this job does like some background housekeeping is all it does, but you want to set this job up so that it can keep the captured invoices clean and process stuff in the background. And if we go home, I want to close these windows up. Oops. I don't want to save that. Go to accounts payable, invoice capture queue. So on top here is the queue. And then on the bottom is, so they would be for security, the bottom part where you drop in files, that's the invoice capture. And then the top is the queue. The queue means you can actually process the transactions in. And then the bottom is where you would set it. If you have, once you have a subscription, you'll have your documents remaining. It'll say maybe you bought 30,000 documents, and it'll say you've used 5 of 30,000. And then it'll tell you your start and end contract date here. This email address is a static email address. So if a WorkPlace user within your company emails an invoice to this address, it will fall into the queue. And as long as their email address is in the WorkPlace security record, they will become the owner of the transaction with that system setting that I talked about. If you decide to have like vendors email your invoices in or POs in, because they can still use this email address, but what happens, and you can see down here, I emailed one in from an address it doesn't recognize, and the invoice capture user becomes the owner of that transaction. And this is why you want to make the invoice capture user, or you want to make your users a alternate for the invoice capture user so they can see these transactions and be able to process them. And you can take ownership of them. And you could also FTP invoices if you wish to this address, and it's got the username and password right inside the thing. So you can the URL, sorry. So you can FTP the address as well. I'm going to go ahead and just drop in a couple things that we can look at in a second. So when you can just drag and drop invoices right from Windows Explorer. Like I said, if you email, you don't have to worry about it. You'll just come back in here and they'll be here. And you can hit refresh and it'll start showing a status of those transactions. Just get a second here to process. So as far as statuses go, when it's rejected, there's a validation error, and you can see over to the right, the phone number is required on this transaction. Exported means that the document, like the vendor's already been learned and knows what to do. It likes the invoice. It's basically ready to be edited and submitted for approval. And since we turned off those auto submit, if we hadn't turned off that auto submit, instead of exported, this would just submit the transaction and it would go out because it's already, there's nothing wrong with that transaction. There again, we got rejected and it tells you a redo requested. So what I did, and I'll show you in a minute, is, I requested a redo. Exported again. I emailed an invoice in earlier, and it's exported because it recognizes the invoice, and there's just no problems. There's no validation errors. It just needs to be submitted. And then the two I just dropped in are pre-processing. If I hit refresh again, give it a in here. So when you refresh, it reaches out to the hosted environment, and as Workplace OCR is a hosted environment, but the transactions are part of your Workplace installation in your environment. And you can see now they've been exported. If you ever want to delete a document, you want to use the trash button here, and you can delete the invoice here. You never want to use the one inside the OCR capture screen that we'll look at in just a second here. We'll just take this one first. So we just click on Make Corrections, and this is the Invoice Capture learning screen. So basically, these are the fields that we have to select from. My vendor name, if I just click in the field, and I can highlight the area. Vendor address, I just take my mouse and highlight. The phone number is required because if it takes a look at like a logo, so a lot of vendors have just their logo on the top for their name. If it doesn't like the logo, if for some reason it can't recognize it, it will take this phone number and it will look up in your system and look for a matching vendor with that phone number. And if it can't find my phone number, if there's a tax ID, it'll do the same thing, and it'll try to match that invoice for you. My invoice date, my due date, recognize the invoice number. There's no tax on this invoice. To recognize my freight, my subtotal, my total, and PO 1374, which is not right. There is no PO. This is not a PO invoice. So in this case, once I teach it that that's not a PO, take that out. Then then it takes 5 times to teach an invoice to be able to automatically recognize and process it out. Each quantity is not each quantity is actually one, and that. Now you can see if for some reason it recognized tax. See how this turns red? If you hover your mouse over, you can see that the total is the tax total plus the freight total plus the subtotal. In some cases, some invoices, the subtotal is in a strange spot. So sometimes you have to have a subtotal here, so you just have to find that field and select it. And then once it's correct, it just turns and goes green. And I can hit save. And what it's going to do now is take me over to the Invoice OCR capture screen. Entry screen. For it. So this is the Invoice Capture or OCR entry screen. And this is the place. If I get to this position, and let's go back here. Go back here to my Invoice Capture queue. So here where it says exported, ones that are already exported but make corrections, it should take me right to this screen because, and like I said, because I turned on that setting to not automatically submit, it's going to take me to this screen, not submit it for a transaction. If I want to redo, I can just click on redo. If I don't, and start learning the invoice all over again. And go through the same process of the address is not required. The only thing that's actually required is phone number, vendor name, all the particular information. I can save again. Oops, it's not a PO invoice either. Like I said, once it learns that, then it doesn't recognize invalid fields. It may recognize, like in this case, the proximity of where the PO number is to that number. It's very possible that's why it thinks it's a PO number, is because it knows. Smart. Save again, wait for the entry screen to come up. you see my invoice number, and you can see there is a limited number of fields that are available in this entry screen. We do have our item number, we have item description, quantity, price, amount extended. I mean, our freight, everything's here. Now, if I have something like AA or projects that are required for this invoice, and I can submit this right now, and I'll go ahead and submit this one. Save and submit. This will create a check request for me because it's a non-PO invoice. I can go back to the queue here. You can see, you can see it was check request 11. I go back to this one that we looked at earlier. Let's just, kind of pretend that this is actually for a project. But since those fields aren't available, I can go right to invoice entry, which takes me to the actual check request screen. And within this screen, now I can that was a PO invoice, wasn't it? That was a PO invoice. I missed that part. So for PO invoices, same thing with a PO invoice though. So if it's a PO invoice and you need to enter more data or submit it, maybe I need to select payment terms because it may not have been selected. Save and submit. I can go right to that entry screen and make any modifications I need to do before I submit it for approval. Let's go back and grab the rated one, accounts payable, invoice capture queue again. And we'll grab this one right here. Now you can see this one was the owner is the invoice capture user, but since I'm the alternate, I can take ownership of it. Normally, probably what I want to do is I just want to select my user up here. That becomes my transaction. Save. And again, I recognize the PO number. I'm just going to take that out because I know that's not valid anyway. Or I can do redo again and relearn the invoice. And now I'll go to invoice entry. Now it should take me to the check request screen. And now again, if I know maybe I have item numbers that I need to, select these items from because the invoice didn't have them on there. There's my freight. Maybe I need to give it a name. There's just different, depending on the client, different qualifications that might be needed before I can submit this transaction. And you can see I am the requester now, so it's going to follow my routing rules, my workflow. If I want to delegate it to another user, I can delegate it from here. If I need to put a reason code for something, I can put it there. As you can see, the invoice is captured as an attachment, and I can submit the transaction. And we'll go do another one here. We'll take this PO invoice for the last one. And again, you can see how it recognized the PO on this invoice. And this is a brand new vendor I did today, so it was already recognized that I was the owner because I submitted it. So I should just be able to hit save, submit. And as long as it matches my PO, and then it creates my receive match session invoice, receive match invoice session 15. I can actually click on that, go into that section, and now I want to see the details of it. It's just like regular WorkPlace transaction. I can see it's received and invoiced one. You can see if we go to the check requests, all my check requests I've submitted through this transaction are all here waiting. And they're just like, once it goes past the invoice capture entry screen, it becomes a regular transaction. So you can, as long as you are the owner of the transaction or you have security, you can process it just like any other check request or any other receive match session that you have. Oops, GL accounts. I must not have GL accounts. We'll just pick one here to get by here. Here. Normally, of course, you would pick GL accounts that match your system. Did I miss one? Come down here. And we just submit it. See here and wait for it for a second. It should be maybe been auto approved because these check requests. You can see I have it already turned on the auto. So it's created my check request, and if this was connected to an ERP, it would have, the transaction would have went over my ERP and with my receive match because I have that enabled in WorkPlace. So that's a roundabout way of, or a go-around way of our WorkPlace OCR. I can open it up and answer some questions if you want to post any questions in either the chat window or the question and answer window, whichever way you'd like. So somebody's asking if an invoice comes in from that vendor, it populates correctly. So yes, once it learns after 5 times of teaching the invoice that the vendor's invoice has that that logo's in a specific spot, it recognizes it, or that vendor's name, yes, it'll automatically process over and create a transaction for that vendor. Does anybody else have any questions? So to add this onto your license, it is a subscription-based product, so you pay so much per package of licenses, and the sales department can help you with the cost of that, and then you can buy them in blocks. Like I said before, with the with the documents remaining, it'll tell you if you buy 12,000 invoices and you got, if you get up to 11,000 and it's only July, you can reach out to sales and get some before you run out. Because once you do run out, if you I've no remaining documents, it will stop processing invoices because it's subscription based. So, but yeah, if you can just reach out to sales and they can give you that. If you don't have check request or receive match, then you have to add the receive match and check request as well, because those are required with the WorkPlace OCR capture or invoice, OCR. Can invoices be scanned centrally? So yes, invoices could be scanned centrally if you did them on a copier, you could send the copier email in the invoices right to the OCR if you had that that type of copier, or you could use, like I said, the FTP. You could FTP them in, and then they would show up on the dashboard. You've got to be careful with the invoice capture user, because you want to make sure that everybody has access to as an alternate for that user. And if you're using PaperSave, somebody has a question. It's for PaperSave and QuickTag and DocInsight, they all become, any attachments you add on OCR works the same as a workplace transaction. It becomes an attachment over to PaperSave, QuickTag, and DocInsight. It's just like a regular workplace transaction. Scanning documents in PaperSave today and not in Workplace, that I don't have an answer. I'll have to get an answer for you on that one. But if you're creating the transaction in Workplace, that works fine. But you also get an answer on that one. I'm not sure how they get over from PaperSave to Workplace, that functionality. Within your ERP, somebody asked if it provides visibility back to the original invoice. It's going to be the same as Workplace does today, because once you get past the OCR and you create the transaction, if you can, if you can have visibility to the transaction in your ERP, you're going to have visibility now just like a regular Workplace transaction. And yes, if the GL code is entered on the PO transaction, then yes, it will be available when it goes to the invoice capture, because you're matching the lines. I'm going to end the session now, but as always, if you have any questions concerning the purchase of Workplace OCR, you can reach out to our sales department. Or if you have any questions, feel free to create a support case, and you'll be routed to someone who can answer your questions, assist you as well. It does require, if you want Workplace Assistant to implement this, it requires a minimum of a 4-hour SOW for our assistants to train and test and live environment. But we are certainly happy to help you get set up and take care of that. Thank everybody for attending, and I'm going to be putting together a questionnaire, or the answers to these questions that people have written on this session, and we had one last week. So I'm going to compile those together, and probably by the end of the week, I'll email out to everybody that attended so you get some answers. There is an attachment handout that you can grab that just gives some facts about invoice capture. I didn't open it up here. I can cover that real quick. The biggest thing is that in your network, you need to be able to allow traffic to the app Invoice Capture WorkplaceCloud.com. Oops. Why I did that. So you need to be able to allow traffic to that on your network. All right, well, thank you everybody for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you very much.